My name is Evan and I'm 28 now, but this memory, sharp and chilling, dates back to when I was just 7 or 8 in 2nd or 3rd grade. It's hard for me to recall details from that far back, but this particular night is seared into my mind for reasons that will soon become horrifyingly clear. It was a typical school day, except the heavens had opened up, raining cats and dogs from dawn till dusk. After picking me up, my parents, dressed in their finest, left the house for some kind of upscale event, a fundraiser, a fancy dinner party, the specifics now lost to the blur of time. Their plan was to return home that same night. But as they were gone, the storm intensified dramatically, transforming the roads into treacherous, unsafe waterways. Driving long distances became impossible. Reluctantly, they made the decision to spend the night at a friend's house, much closer to where the event was held. I remember them calling me on the old house phone, their voices filled with apologies, repeatedly expressing remorse for leaving me there by myself. I, with the boundless confidence of a child oblivious to true danger, insisted I was fine, not even hungry, already envisioning a night of unsupervised freedom. My mom, however, ever the cautious one, gave me a list of tasks. Her voice, though apologetic, was firm. Lock all the doors and windows, keep at least one house light on, and make sure all the blinds were closed. Typical stuff, she said, but infused with an urgency I didn't quite grasp then. At the time, I didn't understand why they were making such a big deal. I wasn't quite old enough to realize the importance of not leaving a child my age home alone. In fact, I was actually kind of excited to have the place to myself. It meant unlimited candy from the hidden stash and, best of all, no bedtime. My bedroom, being a relic of simpler times, didn't have a TV or any kind of screen, so I gravitated towards the living room, settling onto the plush couch, ready to binge-watch whatever late-night cartoons were on. I told myself I'd do all the things my mom had requested right before going to sleep, since I was planning on staying up all night anyway. The thought of being a responsible, independent adult, even for a single night, was thrilling. But, as is often the case with grand plans and copious amounts of sugar, the inevitable crash arrived. At some point later in the night, the sugar-fueled energy dissipated, and I accidentally drifted off to sleep, curled up on the couch, the television's flickering light painting shifting patterns on the walls. No surprise there, really. I don't remember the exact time I woke up, but it was late enough for the TV to have gone into sleep mode, meaning a minimum of 3 hours had passed. The first thing I distinctly noticed upon waking was the cold. It was much colder than before, a chilling presence that immediately registered in my sleepy mind. Nothing too out of the ordinary, I thought. Temperatures do drop at night. But the difference was significant, pronounced enough for me to instantly make a connection even at that young age. My initial impulse was to just curl back up, to pull the blanket tighter and succumb to the lure of sleep again. But then the image of my mom's earnest face, the list of her instructions, flashed through my mind. Even at that tender age, a deeply ingrained sense of responsibility, coupled with a healthy fear of parental disapproval, made me acutely aware that she would find out if I hadn't followed her instructions. The thought of getting into trouble, of breaking the trust she'd placed in me by leaving me alone, was enough to stir me from my cozy stupor. So, with a groan, I forced myself off the couch, my small legs heavy with exhaustion, and began my reluctant nocturnal patrol. My mission: to check all the windows and doors. I went around the house, a tiny, determined sentinel in the vast, quiet darkness, meticulously performing each task my mom had assigned. The front door, then the back, each clicked securely into place as I tested their locks. I pulled down all the blinds, one by one, cloaking the house in a shroud of privacy against the stormy night. I even checked the lights, ensuring at least one remained on, a small beacon against the encroaching shadows. Everything was shut tight, just as she'd asked. Yet, despite my thoroughness, a persistent chill permeated the air, making the house feel unnervingly colder than it should have been. It was a subtle, pervasive coldness that seeped into my bones, raising goosebumps on my arms. I even pressed my hand against a couple of the windows, feeling for a telltale draft, a subtle crack that might explain the pervasive cold, but they were all perfectly sealed, impenetrable against the storm. My young mind, seeking a logical explanation for the inexplicable, settled on the most convenient, if improbable, theory. Perhaps the fierce storm had knocked out the heater, or perhaps some unseen mechanism had simply malfunctioned. The explanation made enough sense to my tired, childlike brain at the time, and I was so utterly exhausted that I couldn't devote any more energy to puzzling over the lingering cold. With my duties seemingly fulfilled and my immediate concern for heat dismissed, I headed upstairs, eager to crawl into my own bed and finally forget about the odd chill. As I ascended the creaking wooden stairs, the true ferocity of the storm became undeniable. The living room, tucked into the relatively shielded center of the house, had buffered me from its full wrath. But my childhood bedroom, with its large external window, offered no such sanctuary. The rain, no longer a gentle patter, was slamming against the glass like a relentless, percussive assault, as if it were a living entity, trying desperately to breach the very defenses of my home. Every minute or so, a blinding, almost blinding flash of lightning would tear through the inky blackness of the night, followed almost instantaneously by a deafening clash of thunder that rattled the very foundations of the house. I wasn't scared of storms at that age, not in the typical sense. The raw power of nature held a certain fascination. But in that moment, a nascent, terrifying fear took root. The very real possibility of a massive tree heavy with rain crashing through the roof, engulfing our home in a chaotic, splintered mess. That worry, a concrete and immediate threat, was likely why sleep, despite my profound exhaustion just 20 minutes prior, now stubbornly eluded me. I lay rigid in my bed, listening to the relentless drumming of the rain and the earth-shaking rumble of the thunder, my mind racing, unable to find peace. Then, amidst the chaotic symphony of the storm, amidst the booming thunder and the relentless drumming of the rain, I began to pick up on other sounds. What sounds? Every so often, a strange, distinct creaking noise would punctuate the downpour, a faint, unsettling sound like shifting wood under an unseen strain. My entire room was carpeted, a soft, plush barrier against noise, so I knew instinctively that the sound couldn't be coming from within my immediate space. My first thought, desperate for a rational explanation, was a tree swaying violently in the ferocious wind, its ancient branches groaning under the immense pressure. But the sound didn't quite fit. Even then, young as I was, I knew the distinct auditory landscape associated with thunderstorms, the roar of the wind, the sharp crackle of lightning, the deep, resonating boom of thunder. This creaking was different, a discordant note in the storm's natural rhythm, something out of place, and it began to truly bother me. It wasn't the storm keeping me awake anymore. It was that persistent, unsettling sound burrowing deep into my fragile sense of security. I couldn't take it much longer. The tension in the room, amplified by the unknown sound, became unbearable. I sat up slowly, my eyes scanning the darkened room, not entirely sure what I was looking for, but desperate for an explanation, for any sign of what was making that eerie noise. I strained my ears, trying to filter out the cacophony of the storm, to focus solely on the faint, unsettling creaking. A flash of lightning momentarily illuminated the entire room, painting it in stark, fleeting detail. Everything looked normal, but my eyes were drawn, almost instinctively, to the only wooden thing in the room, the source of a subtle, inexplicable pull: my closet. The room plunged back into profound darkness, and I sat there, perfectly still, my breath held captive in my lungs, every nerve ending tingling with a premonition of dread. About a minute later, another blinding flash of lightning split the night, and my room was bathed in light once more, just for a split second. And in that terrifying, fractured instant, I saw something that made me choke on my own fear, a gasp trapped in my throat. The closet door was slightly ajar. It had been closed before. I was 100% certain of it. I had meticulously checked everything downstairs, and I was sure I had closed my own bedroom door upon entering. So, someone or something had opened it. A cold wave of realization, sharp and undeniable, washed over me. There was something in my room. I didn't scream. I didn't speak. My mind went blank, processing only the raw, primal terror of the discovery. My body moved on pure instinct, fueled by an adrenaline surge. I slid out of bed as quietly as I could, my movements slow and deliberate, each muscle screaming with the effort of silence. Then I began the agonizing walk towards the door, my small legs feeling like lead. That short distance, from my bed to the bedroom door, felt like a 500-mile, 5-year journey through a nightmare landscape. Every single step was a conscious act of will, each soft creak of the floorboards beneath my feet amplified into a thunderous roar in my ears, betraying my presence. The moment I slipped out of my room, my descent down the stairs was a silent, desperate flight. I didn't dare to look back, my focus solely on reaching the perceived safety of the floor below, driven by an overwhelming urge to seek refuge in the darkest, most hidden corner of the house. I dove under the dining room table, its solid oak offering a flimsy, psychological shield against the unseen horror above. Only then, once I was truly concealed, did the dam break. A silent, uncontrollable torrent of tears streamed down my face, hot and stinging against my cold cheeks. I didn't know what else to do. My small mind, overwhelmed by the enormity of the situation, could only process the terrifying truth. There was someone in my house, in my room, and my parents were miles away, unreachable through the fury of the storm. I lay there, curled into a tight ball, my small body trembling uncontrollably, the metallic taste of fear coating my tongue. I'm not sure how long I stayed under that table, suspended in a purgatory of terror, but at some point, a new sound, chillingly distinct, pierced the oppressive silence. Footsteps. They were walking down the stairs, heavy and deliberate at first, then growing closer, step by agonizing step. I held my breath, my lungs burning with the effort of staying utterly still, convinced that even the slightest sound, a gasp, a whimper, would betray my hiding spot, would seal my fate. The footsteps were not normal. They sounded chaotic. Less like a person walking and more like whatever it was jumping and pinballing down the stairs, hitting each step with an uncontrolled, heavy thud. It was a bizarre, unsettling rhythm, a staggered descent that sent shivers of profound unease down my spine. The footsteps grew closer still. My breath hitched in my throat as they approached the dining room, moving with an eerie, unnerving precision, as if they knew exactly where I was hiding. The air beneath the table grew impossibly thick, suffocating me with an unseen presence. I really thought I was going to die. My small mind, overwhelmed by the sheer terror, could conjure no other outcome for myself. And then, from under the table, I saw them. My view was limited, obscured by the tablecloth, so I couldn't see their upper body, only their feet and legs. 2 bare feet, caked in nasty, dark mud, walked into view, their presence a grotesque intrusion into my safe space. The legs were tinted a sickly yellow, an unnatural hue that defied explanation, and they looked gross, almost disfigured. There were angry, red cuts all over their legs, angry lacerations that looked as if they had stumbled and rolled through a particularly vicious thorn bush. They were also stumbling, swaying precariously, their movements disjointed and unsteady, as if they were struggling to even stand upright, their gait a drunken, terrifying dance. And just when I thought the horror couldn't possibly escalate, they dropped something. It was a wrench. The heavy, metallic clatter against the hard floor echoed in the silent house, a shockingly loud sound in the stillness. It took every fiber of my being, every ounce of childlike self-preservation, to fight back the scream that threatened to erupt from my throat. If that person, that thing, bent down to pick up the wrench, they would definitely see me, cowering beneath the table, my small frame exposed. With wide, terrified eyes, I watched as the feet stood still, unmoving. They didn't bend down for the wrench, but they didn't walk away either. It felt like a standoff, a horrifying tableau where any wrong move, any sudden sound, could mean the end of my short life. The tension was unbearable, stretching thinner and thinner until it felt like it would snap. Then, finally, after what felt like an eternity suspended in terrifying anticipation, the bare, muddy feet resumed their stumbling gait. They walked away, disappearing from my limited view beneath the table. I remained frozen, straining my ears, listening as the chaotic footsteps stomped and stumbled around the first floor of our house. The sounds were erratic, unpredictable, a terrifying game of hide-and-seek where I was the desperate prey. The ordeal stretched on, each passing moment feeling like an hour, an endless eternity of dread. And then, at last, the unmistakable sound of the front door opening, followed by a soft, definitive click as it shut again. They were gone. The realization was a wave of pure, unadulterated relief so potent it left me weak and trembling. But despite the immediate relief, I remained hidden under that table for a long time. Part of it was lingering fear, a deep-seated dread that he might still be lurking, that the sounds of his departure were just another cruel trick. But another part of it was what I can only describe as profound trauma. I was at that tender age where I understood the immense danger I had just faced, the terrifying proximity of true evil, but I was nowhere near old enough to process or cope with such an experience. My small mind grappled with the enormity of it all, leaving me shaken and profoundly scared. The rest of the night remains a blur, a haze of exhaustion and lingering terror. Driven by an irrational need to erase all evidence of the night's horrors, I eventually crawled out from under the table. My eyes, still wide with fear, spotted the wrench lying glinting on the floor. I picked it up, my fingers recoiling from the cold metal, a desperate attempt to prevent my parents from ever finding it, from ever knowing what had transpired. After ensuring the front door was truly locked this time, a frantic double-check, I slunk back upstairs, my movements furtive and silent. I crawled into my bed, still drenched in a cold sweat, and somehow, miraculously, fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. Everything went back to normal after that. For whatever reason, a powerful fear of repercussions overwhelmed any desire to confess. I was terrified they would discover I hadn't locked the doors as instructed, that I had failed their trust. So, I kept the entire terrifying ordeal to myself, burying it deep within the confines of my young mind. It wasn't until several years later, well into my teenage years, that I finally mustered the courage to tell them the story. And even then, it took considerable convincing for them to believe me, so outlandish and fragmented were my childhood memories. Looking back, not telling them the moment it happened was an awful decision, a desperate act of self-preservation that ultimately prolonged my suffering. There was nothing that could have been done about the event itself, so far removed from the incident, but the emotional toll it took was immense. Frankly, this experience traumatized me for basically the rest of my childhood. From that night on, I slept with a nightlight, its soft glow a meager defense against the encroaching darkness. I developed a profound fear of the dark that clung to me for years, a constant, suffocating presence that refused to dissipate. Even now, decades later, I still struggle to fully explain what happened that night. The bare, muddy legs, the disfigured appearance, the chaotic stumbling, it all remains a chilling enigma. But one lesson was seared into my soul with terrifying clarity: lock your doors at night. Always, without fail. I was 15 when the next chilling incident unfolded, a particularly rainy Saturday night in May, just weeks before the liberating promise of summer break. I'm an only child, living with my mom and dad in a home that's arguably a bit too large for just the three of us. My parents, with a wry, long-running joke, always claimed it was never their intention to have only one kid. They just never got around to having more. This backdrop of quiet suburban life, however, often belied a deeper, more personal struggle for me. I've always battled a constellation of unusual medical conditions, frequent panic attacks that leave me gasping for air, a tendency to faint unexpectedly, and often a profound difficulty breathing. Beyond these physical challenges, there's another peculiar quirk of mine. I require absolute, total silence to fall asleep. Even the softest hum of a distant fan is enough to keep me wide awake, my mind racing in the oppressive quiet. I've largely learned to cope, but sleepovers and vacations remain an unbearable ordeal, constantly disrupting my delicate balance. People often wax poetic about the soothing sound of rain, how it lulls them into peaceful slumber. For me, it does the exact opposite. It doesn't rain often where I live, but every now and then, we experience these insane, torrential downpours that become my personal tormentors, keeping me awake all night, every single drop a tiny hammer blow against my fragile peace. To be fair, it wasn't a full-blown thunderstorm that night, but the rain was heavy enough to make sleep an impossible dream, no matter how hard I tried to block out the relentless patter against the roof. It was late, well past midnight, when I finally surrendered to the inevitable. Sleep was not coming. I slipped out of bed, a plan already forming in my mind, a walk in the rain. This wasn't a new impulse. My parents, understanding my unique sleep struggles, actually encouraged it. We lived in a very safe residential area, bordering a vast public park that was always well lit, making late-night strolls surprisingly comfortable and seemingly safe. I quietly pulled on my rain jacket, tiptoed downstairs, and stepped outside without bothering to grab an umbrella. I deliberately left my phone behind, knowing its glowing screen would only further sabotage any chance of rest. Outside, an unexpected tranquility settled over me. I've always found solace in nature, and the sight of the trees gently swaying in the wind, raindrops screaming down their branches, was exactly what my overstimulated mind craved. After about 20 minutes, a welcome wave of exhaustion washed over me. I turned around, starting the trek back towards my house, confident I'd be able to fall asleep the moment my head hit the pillow. As I cut through the park, my gaze drifted towards the road and I saw something strange. A long, black object lay flat in the middle of the street. My first thought was an oddly shaped garbage bag or some discarded debris. But the closer I looked, the more a sickening realization began to dawn on me. It was a person, lying face down, motionless in the middle of the street. A cold, nauseating feeling bubbled up in my stomach. The only thought ricocheting through my brain was the terrifying possibility that they had been hit by a car, injured, or worse. There was no other logical explanation for someone lying motionless in the street, especially in such a heavy downpour. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to keep my head down, to continue walking, to pretend I hadn't seen anything. But my parents had raised me differently. Ingrained in my very core was the imperative to help anyone in need. So, against every instinct for self-preservation, I started approaching the motionless figure in the street. As I drew closer, the dim ambient light, filtered through the thick rain, allowed me to make out what they were wearing: black pants and a dark plaid shirt. Definitely not the kind of attire someone would choose for a late-night stroll in a heavy rainstorm. Judging by the clothing, it was a man, which was what I had instinctively assumed. I'm not sure if it was the sheer gravity of the situation finally registering, or something else entirely, but as I walked towards the street, an intense cold permeated my body. It was as if the lukewarm rain had suddenly turned to ice, a jarring, almost inexplicable sensation. Just as I was closing in on the road, a blood-curdling screech ripped through the air from somewhere behind me. Instinct took over. I whipped my head around, adrenaline flooding my veins, my heart hammering against my ribs. The sound was like a howl, but slightly off-key, like a wounded animal in immense pain. That's the only way I could describe it. A quick scan of the treeline, shrouded in the oppressive darkness of the rainy night, revealed nothing. The sound must have come from deeper within the park, suggesting no immediate, visible danger. Still, the sheer strangeness of it, the raw, primal sound, had my heart racing. I had never heard anything like it before, and the complete lack of an explanation, the eerie silence that followed, was what truly triggered that feeling of pure, unadulterated fear. But that feeling was about to get 1,000 times worse. Because when I turned back around and faced the street, the person wasn't lying down anymore. They were sitting perfectly upright, facing me, their head cocked at an unnatural angle, staring directly at me. In that horrifying moment, everything else started to fade. My vision narrowed, tunneling into the grotesque tableau before me. The only thing keeping me from passing out right there, collapsing onto the wet ground, was the muffled rhythmic symphony of 1,000 raindrops pattering all around me, a distant, comforting counterpoint to the terrifying silence emanating from the figure. Before I could even react, before my mind could process the impossible, the person stood up. And then he sprinted towards me. A demonic smile stretched across his face, a twisted, predatory grin that seemed to absorb all the light around it. And what's worse, he was holding something in his hand, what looked chillingly like a kitchen knife, its blade glinting even in the dim light. Up until that very moment, I hadn't truly understood what it meant to fear for your life. All my previous anxieties, my panic attacks, paled in comparison to this raw, visceral terror. I snapped out of my haze, my mind screaming, and ran as fast as my legs could carry me, turning sharply in the opposite direction. As soon as I started running, I heard him yell, "I'll kill you," at the top of his lungs, the words distorted by the wind and the rain, but unmistakable in their chilling intent. The wet grass made it impossible to run at full speed, my feet slipping and sliding, but my one saving grace was that whoever was chasing me would have to contend with the same treacherous conditions. I didn't want to lead him to my house, so I veered towards the denser part of the trees, hoping I could lose him in the park. I knew that was where the strange screech had just come from, a chilling thought, but I had no other choice, no other option for escape. I didn't look back once. My legs pumped furiously, my lungs burning, the instinct for survival overriding everything else. I just ran like my life depended on it, and considering the insanely cracked-out, deranged look on that guy's face, I was certain it did. I plunged into the thickest part of the woods, hoping the dense foliage and the deepening darkness would offer me a place to hide before he caught up. I didn't even know if he was still chasing me, but I couldn't stop, couldn't risk it. Part of me felt that if I stopped running, the sheer weight of the fear would finally catch up, and I'd collapse, passing out immediately. I finally made it deep enough into the woods, and just when I thought my lungs would burst from exhaustion, I ducked behind a massive oak tree, pressing myself against its rough bark, trying desperately to catch my breath. I risked a quick glance behind me. No one. Or at least, no one I could see in the oppressive gloom. The only thought pounding in my head at that point was a single desperate question. How in the world was I going to get home safely? I didn't feel comfortable moving, the threat still too palpable, too immediate. So, I waited there, a trembling bundle of nerves, listening to the relentless drumming of the rain and the frantic thumping of my own heart. I must have waited for at least 20 agonizing minutes before finally daring to step out from behind the tree. I decided on the longest route home, circling around the backside of the park, through a different section that eventually spat me out a few streets away from my house. No one followed me. The path remained silent, save for the patter of the rain and the distant, muffled sounds of the suburban night. I finally made it home, my body a shivering mess, and collapsed onto my bed, drenched and utterly traumatized. I never got an answer for anything that happened that night. That unearthly howl, the strange, wounded animal sound, is honestly what confuses me the most. I have a hard time believing it was somehow related to the man who tried to attack me, but the timing was just too coincidental, too unnerving. My most plausible, albeit unsettling theory is that the attacker heard the screech too, looked up, saw me, and then, for reasons unknown, decided to act on whatever dark impulse possessed him. As for his motivation, I have no idea. There are just crazy people out there. Maybe he was on drugs or suffering from a severe mental illness. I know it's not a real explanation, not a satisfying one, but I can't think of a better one. I still live in the same house today, and even though several years have gone by, it's hard not to think about this experience every so often, especially on rainy nights. The image of that demonic smile, the glint of the knife, and the chilling sound of his words, "I'll kill you," are forever etched in my memory.